I always believed that family meant fairness, that no matter what, the people who raised me would at least respect me. But life has a cruel way of proving us wrong. It all started with the Brew Haven, my parents' upscale cafe, a place they had poured their hearts into. Since I was a kid, I had heard endless stories about their dream, how one day my brother David and I would take over and carry on their legacy. So, when I finished college and they offered me a position at the cafe, I accepted without hesitation. It wasn't a high-paying role, not that I cared. I was eager to prove myself, to contribute. David, my older brother, had already been working there for years. He seemed to be doing well, driving a nice car, moving into a fancy apartment, always dressed in the latest brands. I assumed he had saved well. Big mistake. For months, I dedicated myself to the business. Late nights closing up, early mornings prepping for the rush, weekends spent handling extra tasks. I went above and beyond, thinking I was investing in something that would one day be mine too. But then, everything changed in a single moment of eavesdropping. One evening, while wiping down the espresso machines, I heard David laughing over the phone in the back room. "Yeah, Mom and Dad just sent it over. Crazy, right? So much for struggling at work, huh?" I froze. Sent what over? At first, I tried to brush it off. Maybe it was a bonus, a reward for his hard work. But something about his tone, so smug, so casual, made my stomach churn. That night, as we sat down for dinner, I brought it up casually. "Mom, Dad, does David get bonuses at the cafe?" Mom scoffed, shaking her head like I had just asked if the sky was purple. "Emily, family doesn't work for money. We all help each other out. That's just how it is." I blinked. If family doesn't work for money, then why was David getting paid? Just then, a notification dinged on David's phone. He smirked as he tilted his screen just enough for me to see. A large payment had just been deposited into his account. "Maybe you're just not worth paying," he said, his smirk widening. Something inside me snapped. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I didn't even demand an explanation. I just turned around, walked away, and that was the moment everything truly began to unravel. I barely slept that night. My mind kept replaying the scene over and over. David's smirk, my mother's dismissive tone, my father's silence. How could they do this to me? For years, I had given everything to the Brew Haven, the cafe I thought was part of my future. I had stayed late cleaning tables, long after the last customer left. I had spent early mornings organizing deliveries, making sure everything ran smoothly. And for what? To be free labor while my brother got paid to do the same job? The next few days were a blur. I kept showing up to work, but something inside me had changed. The love I once had for the cafe was gone. Every time I saw my parents, I could only hear my mom's words. "Family doesn't work for money." Every time I saw David, I imagined that bank notification flashing across his screen. Then, one morning, as I was restocking shelves, my phone buzzed. A message from Michael, an old colleague who had quit months ago. "Michael, hey, I heard you left. Good for you. By the way, you might want to check the cafe's finances. Something weird is going on." I frowned. "Me? Weird how?" "Michael, just look into it. Trust me." A pit formed in my stomach. I still had access to some of the financial records. My parents never revoked my login because they never saw me as anything more than their obedient daughter. That night, curiosity got the best of me. I logged in, expecting to find nothing. Instead, I found everything. Massive payments going out, way more than what David should have been getting. Not just a salary, but bonus after bonus, marked under vague descriptions like consulting fees and special allowances. But that wasn't even the worst part. Some of the transactions were under my name. Money that should have been mine, thousands of dollars, had been funneled elsewhere. And where had it gone? Straight into David's account. I gripped the edge of my desk, my breath shallow. This wasn't just unfair treatment. This was theft. My parents hadn't just refused to pay me. They had been stealing from me for months, maybe even years. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like their daughter. I felt like their victim, and I wasn't about to let them get away with it. I sat there for a long time, staring at the screen, my mind racing. The evidence was right in front of me, line after line of financial records proving that my parents had been stealing from me. It wasn't just favoritism anymore. It wasn't just them treating David better. They had used my name, my work, my trust trust to move money, and I never saw a cent of it. At that moment, something inside me hardened. I wasn't going to argue with them. I wasn't going to beg for fairness. I was going to destroy them. But first, I needed a plan. Step 1. Gather more proof. I spent the next few nights backing up everything. Every fraudulent transaction. Every shady payment. Every piece of evidence. I stored it on multiple devices, emailed copies to myself, and even sent a backup to Sophia, a lawyer I had met through a friend. I hadn't spoken to her in a while, but when I explained my situation, she responded almost immediately. Sophia, Emily, this isn't just unethical, it's illegal. If they moved money under your name without your consent, that's fraud. And if they used company funds for personal expenses, that's embezzlement. My heart pounded as I read her words. Fraud. Embezzlement. I had always thought of my parents as unfair, maybe even manipulative, but criminals? I hadn't even considered it before. Can I do anything about it? I asked. Her response was instant. Sophia, with this much evidence? Oh, absolutely. If you take legal action, you won't just get your money back. You could take down their entire business. I clenched my jaw. The Brewhaven had been my parents' pride and joy for years. They had built their reputation on being a wholesome, family-run business. Customers adored them. Investors respected them. I wanted to see all of it burn. Step 2. Confrontation before I made my move. I wanted to give them one last chance to tell me the truth. So, one Sunday evening, I showed up at my parents' house unannounced. The moment I walked in, I could feel the tension. My mother barely looked up from her phone. My father gave me a small nod. David was slouched on the couch, flipping through TV channels like he didn't have a care in the world. I sat down at the dining table, keeping my voice as casual as I could. So, I was going through my finances recently. Found something interesting. My mom raised an eyebrow. Oh? Yeah, I continued, leaning forward. Apparently, I've been getting paid for months, except I never saw a cent of it. Weird, right? Silence. My father didn't move, but I saw his jaw tighten. My mother shifted slightly in her chair. David, for once, had nothing smug to say. He was suddenly very interested in his phone screen. That was all the confirmation I needed. I let the silence drag out before I stood up. Anyway, just thought I'd mention it. I'm sure the authorities will find it just as interesting as I did. That got a reaction. My mother's head snapped up. What? I smiled, slow and deliberate. Oh, didn't I mention? I spoke to a lawyer and an accountant. Let's just say things are about to get very interesting. Then I turned and walked out. And that was the moment everything truly started to fall apart. Step 3, let the fire spread that night. My phone started blowing up. Calls from my mother, my father, even David. I ignored them all. Then came the texts. Mom, Emily, we need to talk. Don't do anything rash. Dad, let's be reasonable about this. Family issues shouldn't be handled this way. David, you're being dramatic. It's not a big deal. Not a big deal? They had stolen from me, used me as free labor, lied to me for years. And now that I was standing up for myself, they wanted to talk about being reasonable? Too late for that. The next morning I met with Sophia again. We officially filed a lawsuit against the Brewhaven for fraud and financial misconduct. And I wasn't the only one who had a problem with them. With Sophia's help, I started reaching out to former employees, people who had left the cafe because of shady business practices. It didn't take long to find others who had been underpaid, overworked, or even scammed by my parents. Then, the final blow. An anonymous whistleblower, not me, I swear, leaked the financial records I had found. The information somehow made its way to a local business watchdog website. And just like that, the Brewhaven was under public scrutiny. Customers started pulling out. Investors backed away. Everything my parents had built over the years was crumbling right in front of them. And David, his precious bank account, the one filled with money stolen from me, was frozen. I could almost picture his face when he found out. But just when I thought things couldn't get any worse for them, the authorities got involved. Step 4, watch it all collapse one morning. I woke up to the news. The Brewhaven was officially being audited for financial fraud. And the deeper investigators dug, the worse it got. Unreported income, tax evasion, misused company funds. It was a mess. And my parents, they had no way out. David was the first to break. For the first time in weeks, he actually called me, and for some reason, I picked up. Are you happy now? he snapped. You ruined everything. I almost laughed. I ruined everything? You and Mom and Dad stole from me, lied to me, used me, and you think I'm the problem? It wasn't stealing, he shot back, his voice cracking. It was just reallocating. They said you'd get it back eventually. I shook my head. Wow, you actually believe that? Silence. I let it stretch out before I continued, my voice calm. You had every opportunity to be better than them, but you chose to be just like them. And now, you're facing the consequences. He didn't say another word before hanging up. And that was the last time we spoke. But things weren't over yet, because soon, the Brewhaven wouldn't just be under investigation. It would be gone. The Brewhaven was unraveling faster than even I had expected. A week after the financial records were leaked, customers started vanishing overnight. Regulars who had been coming for years, gone. Bulk orders from local businesses, canceled. The once busy cafe that used to have a line out the door every morning now looked like a ghost town. But that was just the beginning. By the time the authorities officially launched their audit, it was clear my parents were in deep trouble. The fraud involving my stolen wages was just the tip of the iceberg. The auditors uncovered years' worth of shady transactions, under-the-table payouts, manipulated tax filings, and company money used for personal expenses. And just like that, the IRS got involved. I watched everything unfold from a distance, detached but curious. My phone was still flooded with texts and calls from my family, pleas from my mother, angry rants from my father, and bitter accusations from David. I ignored them all. Then, one morning my lawyer called me. Sophia, Emily, you're going to want to hear this. I leaned back in my chair. Good news? She laughed. Depends on your definition of good. Your parents are officially facing a full-scale investigation for tax fraud. Their assets are frozen. And the Brewhaven? It won't survive this. I exhaled slowly, taking it all in. I had imagined this moment countless times, picturing the cafe crumbling, my parents scrambling to save themselves. But now that it was happening, I felt nothing. No relief, no joy, just emptiness. And my money? I asked. Sophia's tone softened. They'll have to pay you back every last cent. That should have made me feel something. Vindicated, triumphant, powerful. But instead, I just felt tired. Maybe because, despite everything, this wasn't just some business takedown. This was my family falling apart. The fallout, the day after the official audit announcement, my mother finally showed up at my apartment. I opened the door to find her standing there, looking nothing like the polished, confident woman I had grown up with. Her eyes were red and puffy. Her hands shook as she clutched her purse like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Emily, please, she whispered. I sighed, stepping aside to let her in, against my better judgment. She walked in hesitantly, glancing around as if she was seeing me for the first time. She finally sank onto my couch and stared at the floor for a long time before speaking. We lost everything, you know. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I stayed silent. The cafe is going under. Your father is. Struggling. David, her voice caught. His accounts are frozen. He doesn't know what to do. None of us do. I folded my arms. Sounds like a problem you should have thought about before stealing from me. She winced, as if I had slapped her. We never meant to hurt you, I scoffed. You didn't just hurt me, you used me, lied to me, let David live like a king while treating me like free labor. Her hands twisted in her lap. We thought we could fix it before you found out. We always planned to pay you back. With what? I snapped. The cafe is bankrupt. Your accounts are frozen. You had no plan. You just assumed I'd keep working for free forever. She flinched again, but this time, she didn't deny it. For the first time in my life, I saw the truth in her eyes. She had never seen me as an equal. Not really. Your father can't handle this, she murmured. He's drinking more than ever. I don't know what to do anymore. I should have felt something. Guilt, sympathy, a sense of responsibility. Instead, all I felt was cold. That's not my problem, I said simply. Tears welled up in her eyes. Emily, please. We're still family. That was it. The final straw. No, we're not. My voice was sharp. Family doesn't steal from each other. Family doesn't treat one child like royalty and the other like a servant. You made your choice when you took my money, when you lied to my face, when you let David mock me while cashing in on my hard work. She started sobbing. For a moment, I almost felt bad, but then I remembered every night I had spent working overtime while David flaunted his expensive vacations. I remembered every dismissive laugh, every time I was told I should be grateful to be part of the business. And I let go of the last piece of guilt still clinging to me. I can't help you, I said finally. Not anymore. She cried harder. I didn't move. Eventually, she stood up, wiping her face. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her. "I hope you're happy," she whispered before walking to the door. I didn't respond because, honestly, I wasn't happy, but I was free. The end of the Brewhaven. A week later, my lawyer confirmed it. The Brewhaven was officially bankrupt. My parents had to sell their home. David lost everything. The cafe that had once been their pride and joy was now nothing but a for sale sign in the window. I drove past it once, just to see it for myself. The once busy shop was dark, empty, a shell of what it used to be. For years, my parents had treated me like I was worthless, like I didn't deserve to be paid, like I was nothing more than an extra pair of hands to help their golden child thrive. And now, they had lost everything, and for the first time in my life, I knew I was never the worthless one. The silence was the first thing I noticed. No more phone calls, no more desperate texts, no more pleas for forgiveness, disguised as guilt trips. For the first time in months, my family had finally given up on me, and that was when I knew it was truly over. The aftermath. A few weeks after the Brewhaven officially shut down, I received a final update from Sophia. "Your parents settled," she told me. "They've agreed to pay back every cent they stole from you. It'll take time, but the law is on your side. You'll get everything." I expected to feel relieved, vindicated. Instead, I just felt tired. "What about the cafe?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Sophia sighed. "Sold to new owners. Your parents are drowning in legal fees. And David, well, let's just say he won't be flaunting expensive vacations anymore." A strange sense of emptiness settled over me. The Brewhaven had once been my home. I had poured my heart into it, believing it was something I was helping build for my future. But in the end, it had just been a trap, a place where I was expected to sacrifice everything while David reaped the rewards. Now it was gone, and I wasn't sure how to feel about that. The last attempt a few days later, I got an unexpected text from David. "David, Mom's not doing well. You should talk to her." I stared at the message, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. A few months ago, I would have rushed back. I would have believed it was my responsibility to make things right. But now I knew better. Me, she made her choice. David, so did you. I almost laughed at that. So did I? Yeah, I did. I chose to stand up for myself. I chose to not be used anymore. I chose to demand what was mine, even if it meant losing the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. And if that made me the villain in his eyes, so be it. I didn't reply after that. The final goodbye, I never saw my parents again. I heard bits and pieces through mutual contacts, how they had to move into a smaller house, how my father was still trying to recover financially, how my mother barely spoke to anyone anymore. And David? Last I heard, he was struggling to find work. Turns out, when you've spent your whole life coasting on privilege and stolen money, it's hard to adjust when all of it disappears. Not that I cared. I had my own life to rebuild. Moving on, it took time, but I started putting myself first. I found a new job, one where I was actually paid for my work. I moved into a better apartment, surrounded myself with people who respected me, and most importantly, I let go of the past, because the truth was, there was nothing left to fix. My parents weren't sorry for what they did. Not really. They were sorry they got caught. They were sorry they lost everything, but they had never been sorry for hurting me. And that was something I could never forget. So I walked away. And for the first time in my life, I felt free. The real question looking back, I sometimes wondered, did I do the right thing? Should I have forgiven them? Given them a second chance? Would things have been different if I had just let it go? I guess I'll never know. But what I do know is this. If family only values you when you're useful to them, then maybe they were never really family at all. And I'm okay with that. Story 2. If you'd asked me a year ago, I would have told you without hesitation that my family was solid, unshakable, even. We weren't perfect, of course, but we had always stuck together. My parents, Emily and Robert, built a small but successful bakery that had been in our family for over 20 years. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable. My younger brother, Jake, and I grew up understanding the value of hard work and family loyalty. Or at least, I thought we all understood it. I'm 27 now, the eldest, and I've always been the responsible one, the planner. When my grandfather passed 5 years ago, he left me a trust fund. It wasn't an earth-shattering amount, but it was enough to be life-changing if managed wisely. The catch? I couldn't access it until I turned 30, unless it was for specific things like buying a first home or continuing my education. I had my plans, maybe a small apartment in the city, or even starting my own business. It was my safety net, something I had been counting on for years. Jake, my 25-year-old brother, was always more easygoing. He recently got engaged to Olivia, a confident and charming woman a year older than him. She came from a wealthier background, and while she was always polite, I'd noticed a pattern. She had a way of making people agree with her, even when they didn't want to. Some people loved her, others just tolerated her. I wasn't sure which side of the line I stood on yet. That was until a few months ago, when everything changed. The first hint of trouble. It started at a family dinner, one of those relaxed Sunday meals where everyone catches up. Olivia, in her usual effortless way, brought up my inheritance. "You're so lucky," she said, her voice light but purposeful. "It must be amazing knowing you have that kind of financial security waiting for you." I shrugged. "It's nice to have a plan for the future." I kept my answer vague, mostly because I wasn't comfortable talking about my finances in a group setting. Olivia smiled too wide, too knowing. "Have you thought about how you'll use it?" I nodded, explaining in the simplest way possible. "A home, maybe a business." "That's great," she said, pausing before adding, "You know, it would be incredible if you helped Jake and me get a head start. A wedding is so expensive these days, and starting off with a stable home would mean everything to us." I thought she was joking, but when I laughed, her expression didn't change. Jake chuckled awkwardly, brushing it off, but Olivia just held my gaze, waiting. I took a sip of my drink and gave a careful response. "It's really not something I can just hand over. It's meant for specific purposes, and I have my own plans." My parents stepped in at that moment, saying what I assumed was meant to be reassuring that the money was mine and my decision alone. But Olivia didn't look deterred. Instead, she just smiled and said something about how family money should benefit the family. I brushed it off at the time, but that conversation, that was just the beginning. The pressure builds over the next few weeks. Olivia became more persistent. She started bringing it up subtly at first, mentioning how Jake had always struggled more financially than me, how I was in a great position to help, how supporting their dreams would make us all stronger as a family. Jake, for his part, wasn't exactly pushing, but he also wasn't shutting it down. When I brought it up to him privately, he sighed and said, "I get why she's asking. Weddings are expensive, and you are in a good spot to help, but it's your call, of course." That "of course" felt more like an afterthought than genuine support. What really threw me was my parents' reaction. When I finally mentioned how uncomfortable it was making me, I expected them to shut it down immediately. Instead, my mom hesitated. "Olivia just wants to feel like part of the family," she said. "Jake's had it harder than you financially, and maybe she sees this as a way to feel more secure." That was when I realized this wasn't going to go away quietly. The ultimatum that broke everything. The final straw came during a casual lunch with Olivia. Just the two of us. I should have known better, but I was still trying to believe this was all a misunderstanding. She didn't waste time. The moment we sat down, she leaned in, her tone sweet but firm. "I wanted to give you a chance to reconsider my suggestion. It would mean so much to Jake and me if you could gift us part of your inheritance as a wedding present. Not help us out, not consider contributing." She used the word gift, like it was something I was supposed to do. I took a deep breath, keeping my voice as calm as possible. "Olivia, I've already said no. I have my own plans for that money, and I'm not changing them." Her expression shifted just slightly, but enough. The sweetness in her tone evaporated. "I don't understand why you're being so selfish about this." That word, selfish, hit harder than I expected. "I'm not being selfish," I said, my patience wearing thin. "This was left to me for a reason. I have my own future to think about." She shook her head, clearly unconvinced. "You don't even need the money right now. But for us, this could change everything. Jake is your brother. Don't you want to support him?" I stared at her, my hands gripping the edge of the table. "I do support Jake, but this isn't about support. This is about you expecting something that isn't yours." She didn't like that answer. "The fallout begins." By the time I got home, Jake was calling me. "Olivia told me what happened," he started. "Look, she didn't mean to come off strong, but what?" I interrupted. "She outright asked me to hand over my inheritance, and when I said no, she called me selfish." There was a long pause. Then, in a quieter voice, he said, "She's just stressed about the wedding. You could have been a little more understanding." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Are you seriously taking her side on this?" I'm just saying, maybe think about it, he said before hanging up. That's when I knew this wasn't over. In fact, it was only just beginning. After that conversation with Jake, I told myself I was done. I had made my stance clear. I had said no. End of story, right? Wrong. I should have known Olivia wouldn't just drop it. What I didn't expect, though, was how quickly things would escalate. The family meeting that wasn't. A few days after my conversation with Jake, my mom called and asked me to come over for dinner. Nothing unusual, just a family meal. When I arrived, though, it was immediately clear this was not just dinner. Jake and Olivia were already there, sitting next to each other on the couch, and my dad had this serious look on his face. My stomach sank. I wasn't walking into dinner. I was walking into an ambush. Sit down, my mom said, way too gently. I didn't move. What's going on? My dad cleared his throat. We just want to talk. I almost laughed. Talk? Sure. That's what we were calling it now. Olivia, of course, was the first to speak. She started off by apologizing, sort of. She said she didn't mean to come off as pushy, that she was just excited about the wedding, that she wanted everyone to be involved. And then, just as smoothly, she transitioned into her real point. I know we had a little misunderstanding, she said, folding her hands in her lap like this was some kind of business negotiation. But Jake and I have been thinking, and we realized we're not asking for much. We're family. We love each other. And honestly, it would be so meaningful if you helped us start our life together. I just stared at her. I wasn't even surprised anymore, just tired. My mom jumped in next. Honey, you do have a lot of money waiting for you, and it's not like you need it right away. I cut her off. I do need it. Maybe not today, but I have plans. Just because I haven't spent it yet doesn't mean it's free for the taking. Jake finally spoke up. We're not trying to take anything from you. We just thought since we're family you'd want to help. There it was. That family card again. And my dad? The man who had always told me to be smart with my money, he just sat there, silent, avoiding my eyes. That hurt more than anything Olivia could have said. The turning point. I stood up. I can't believe we're even having this conversation, I said, shaking my head. This isn't a discussion. I'm not giving you the money. End of story. Olivia sighed like I was being so difficult. I just don't understand why you're being so defensive about this. It's not like we're strangers. We're family. Funny, I shot back, because real family wouldn't try to guilt trip me into handing over my inheritance. Jake's expression darkened. So that's it? You're really going to be this selfish? My mom flinched at the word. Jake. No, I interrupted. Let him talk. He clearly has a lot to say. Jake's jaw clenched, but he didn't respond. Olivia, on the other hand, just sighed again, standing up like she was so over this. I guess I was wrong about you, she said, shaking her head. I thought you actually cared about your brother. That hit a nerve. I turned to my parents. Are you seriously okay with this? With her sitting here, acting like I'm the bad guy for not handing over money that isn't theirs? They both looked uncomfortable. But did either of them tell Olivia to back off? No, of course not. I exhaled sharply, grabbing my bag. I'm done. Wait. My mom started, but I didn't. I walked out. The aftermath that should have been the end of it. I should have been able to walk away and let them deal with their own entitled nonsense. But Olivia wasn't done. Over the next few days, I started getting calls from aunts, uncles, even some cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. I heard about the situation, one cousin said, voice dripping with judgment. Don't you think you're being a little harsh? What situation? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. The whole inheritance thing, she said. Olivia told us you're refusing to help Jake, even though he's struggling. That doesn't sound like you. I almost laughed. Of course, Olivia was running her mouth. I should have seen this coming. Funny, I said, because the money isn't Jake's, it's mine. And struggling? He's not struggling. He and Olivia just want to upgrade their lifestyle without having to work for it. The cousin went silent. Then, a few seconds later, they mumbled something about hoping we could work it out before hanging up. That was just the first call. Over the next week, I got more. Some were subtle people just checking in to see if I was okay. Others? Not so much. You should do the right thing. Family is more important than money. Jake has always had a harder time than you. The worst part? I could hear Olivia's voice behind every single one of them. She was orchestrating all of this, spinning a story where she and Jake were the victims and I was the villain. And my parents? They didn't shut it down. If anything, they fed into it. I was livid, and I was done playing nice. The moment it all became clear. A few days later, I got a call from a mutual friend of mine and Jake's. You're not going to believe this, she said. She was right. I didn't believe it. Apparently, Olivia had already started making wedding deposits. Big ones. A venue, catering, even a designer dress. The kicker? She had done all of this under the assumption that I would come around and foot the bill. I couldn't even process how entitled that was. This wasn't just a casual request anymore. Olivia had planned for this money like it was already hers. She had banked on me folding under pressure. And Jake? He had let her. That was the moment I knew this wasn't just about money. This was about control. They didn't want my help. They wanted to force me into a role they had written for me, the bankroll, the generous older sister who would just hand over her future without a fight. I wasn't playing that game. The first step in fighting back, I called my lawyer the next day. I needed to make sure beyond any doubt that there was nothing they could do to access my trust. That no one, not even my parents, could pressure the executor into releasing funds early. The lawyer assured me I was completely protected. My trust was locked down, untouchable. That should have made me feel better. Instead, it made me realize something even worse. If Olivia was this bold already, if she was this sure she could manipulate me, what was she going to do when she realized she had lost? Because something told me she wasn't going to take it well, and I was right. Things were about to get even uglier. After locking down my trust with my lawyer, I thought I had done everything I needed to do. I had said no. I had reinforced my boundaries. I had refused to let Olivia and Jake guilt trip me into handing over my future. But I underestimated just how far Olivia was willing to go. The social smear campaign, the first sign that things were about to get worse, came through social media. I don't follow Olivia, but I started getting screenshots from friends and extended family. She wasn't being direct, she was too calculated for that. But the passive-aggressive posts were obvious. Nothing hurts more than family turning their back on you when you need them the most. Some people hoard wealth while their own blood struggles. It's sad, really. Just trying to build a future with the love of my life. But greed ruins everything. Each post had a flood of comments from her friends, and even some relatives, sending her thoughts and prayers and calling me everything from selfish to entitled. It was almost impressive how quickly she had twisted the narrative. And my parents, they weren't stopping it. If anything, they were helping. My mom even commented on one post with, "We just want everyone to be happy. Family is supposed to support each other." I was done. The final confrontation, I went no contact with Olivia and Jake, blocked them both, ignored their messages, but that didn't stop them from getting to me through my parents. A week later, my dad called me and asked me to come over. He sounded tired, almost defeated, so I agreed. I walked in to find my parents sitting on the couch, looking guilty. I sighed, already knowing where this was going. Let me guess, this is about Olivia. Mom wrung her hands together. She's just upset. She doesn't feel welcomed into the family. I let out a humorless laugh. She doesn't feel welcomed because I won't pay for her wedding? Dad exhaled. It's more complicated than that. No, it's really not, I said. She wants my money. I said no. And instead of respecting that, she's turned the entire family against me. They didn't say anything, and that's when I knew. They knew Olivia was in the wrong. They just didn't want to admit it. Mom finally spoke. "We just don't want this to tear the family apart." I stared at her. "Then maybe you should be telling that to Olivia instead of me." Another silence. Then my dad cleared his throat. "We wanted to ask if you could just give a little. Not the whole thing, of course, but maybe a portion. Just enough to." I stood up so fast my chair scraped against the floor. "Oh my God, are you serious right now?" Mom flinched. "Sweetheart, we're just trying to find a way to fix this." "No," I snapped. "You're trying to fix this by making me the one to bend, by letting Olivia walk all over me, by expecting me to be the one who gives in while she gets everything she wants." Dad sighed. "You don't understand." "No, you don't understand," I cut in. "This isn't about the money. It's about control." Olivia expected to win. She thought she could push me into doing whatever she wanted. And instead of shutting her down, you let it happen. They both looked away. And that's when I realized something that should have been obvious all along. They weren't just enabling Jake and Olivia. They were afraid of losing them. Jake was the golden child, the one they had always worried about more. And now he had Olivia, the strong, confident woman who knew exactly how to pull the strings. They would rather risk their relationship with me than risk making Olivia angry. And that was when I stopped fighting for them to see my side. Because if they couldn't see it now, they never would. The fallout, I walked out of my parents' house that day, knowing I wasn't just walking away from an argument. I was walking away from the version of my family I had grown up believing in, and it hurt more than I wanted to admit. But I refused to let Olivia win. So I did the only thing I could do. I cut them off, not forever necessarily, but for now, I needed space. I told my parents that until they could respect my boundaries, I wouldn't be speaking to them. And Jake, Olivia, they weren't even worth a conversation. The aftermath for a while, it was radio silence. I focused on myself, started looking into properties, took steps toward my future, the one I had planned for myself, not the one Olivia had tried to manipulate me into funding. And then, out of nowhere, I got a text from a mutual friend. "You're not gonna believe this." I braced myself. Olivia left Jake. I blinked at my screen. Wait, what? Apparently, once it became clear that I wasn't budging, Olivia's attitude toward Jake started to shift. She got colder, more distant, and then, just like that, she ended it. Packed her bags, moved out, and told Jake she needed someone with real ambition. I should have felt bad for Jake, but honestly, he had every opportunity to see who Olivia really was. He just chose not to. Rebuilding on my terms, it took a while, but eventually, things settled. My parents reached out, apologizing in their own way, not outright, of course, but in little ways. My dad asked how I was. My mom sent me a text saying she missed me, and I let them back in, slowly. Not because I forgot what they did, but because I realized something important. I could love my family without letting them walk all over me. Jake eventually tried to reach out too, but I wasn't ready for that yet. And Olivia, gone. Moved to another city, from what I heard. Probably looking for her next victim. Final thoughts. If there's anything I've learned from this whole mess, it's this. People will show you exactly who they are when money is involved. Believe them. And more importantly, setting boundaries doesn't make you selfish. It makes you strong. And I refuse to be anything less than that ever again.